Hi there, this is Neil Salvage, and welcome to this podcast, Gassing On. Yes, we're going to gas on about the world of ground gas. We're going to meet people in the industry. We're going to visit places and generally find out about interesting things that are happening, developing, and the changes that have gone on before us. So welcome on board and hope you enjoy this podcast. So good afternoon and welcome to this podcast. And this afternoon we've been joined by Peter Atchison of PAG. Good afternoon, Peter.
Good afternoon, Neil. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And how are you?
Likewise well. Thank you very much indeed. Good to speak to you again.
Good, yeah. Well, where do we find you today, Peter? I know you're a man of international globe-trotting in the industry. Where are you? Where do we find you today?
Given that my globe-trotting has been somewhat curtailed by the events of 2020, Neil, you find me sitting in my home office at the moment, as I think many people are currently. But a combination of a home and office now being open, but you do actually find me at home today. Excellent.
Oh, good. Well, how is the work environment for PAG and Peter? How is it all going for you?
Currently, it's very brisk. Like I think probably most of the industry, we had a massive problem at the beginning of 2020 with lockdown. Construction industry, as we all know, dropped 40% very, very suddenly, and it's been a long climb back out. We do seem to be out of the other side of that now, and businesses, or certainly the design end of businesses, is brisk at the moment. Delivery is taking a while to catch up because of supply chain issues and so on and so forth, but we do seem to be heading in the right direction.
Excellent. Well, Peter, I want to wind the clock back a little bit with you. Obviously, we go back a while in history, but where did your journey in ground gas all begin? Where and when did it start for you?
Goodness me, is this a historical question, Neil? I started in this sector, in the geosynthetic sector, in the very early 80s, and probably ground gas in the late 80s, early 90s, pretty much when it first became noticed as a concern. Back in those days, as you will recall, I was heading at Monoflex, and when ground gas became an issue, it fell into the area of geomembranes, where we were already well established. So it was a natural opportunity to develop some material specifically for that application, and then to supply and develop installation regimes around that. So yeah, probably the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s.
Well, it's certainly been quite a changing role, would you say? Has a lot changed in that time, Peter?
Yes and no. The original problem hasn't really changed. As with a lot of things, I think as professionals and engineers, we solve problems very, very quickly. I think the problems were identified and the solutions were developed over a very, very short period of time, probably a period of 18 months to 2 years. The market then, of course, starts to play with that opportunity as market size develops, materials, competitive materials are developed. But typically they kind of follow the same sort of route. So I would say that the initial concepts of the gas protection market haven't changed since the early 90s. The delivery has, and certainly the ability to risk assess and manage the risks is what really moved on enormously. In those days, we just took the view that if gas was identified, you took the solution and you threw a solution at it. We're now very much better at tailoring the solutions to the opportunities or to the concerns or to the risks. Well, some are. Unfortunately, there are still far too many people still embedded in the 1990s doing things that they did then.
No, and I see that myself, Peter. But with all the current guidance and regulation and the guidance and regulation that's gone before us, is this still evolving quite drastically at the moment, do you feel, or is it slowed up a little bit?
I think the actual guidance itself, the rate of evolvement of the guidance has actually reduced. What's happening is people are trying to build on the guidance, some of them to suit their own particular way of doing things, organisations to basically keep themselves credible and to basically rewrite the same things in different ways. But again, I come back to a lot of the work was done early on. The professionals doing it know what they're doing. To my mind, the biggest problem is educating the professionals to actually use what's out there in the right way, rather than necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel.
And where do you think the industry is going? Where are we going to head to? What's it going to be like in 10, 15, 20 years' time, Peter?
I think that depends very much on how brownfield development goes. Interestingly, I'm chairing a meeting later on this afternoon about the involvement of brownfield first within the government policy as regards development. But if we see a large development portfolio expanding, potentially driven by government post-COVID expansion, then inevitably one of two things are going to happen. It's going to take away sways of greenfield sites, which is not ideal, or we're going to see a lot more of the existing brownfield site developed, which is going to mean a larger proportion of opportunities for those of us involved in that sector. So I think it's driven by two things: availability of and desirability of and force of building on brownfield sites, and essentially the growth or otherwise of the construction sector, because you go up on a rising tide and fall on a lowering one, and that's been true all the way through my life in business over 30 years.
Well, that's and I've ridden with you through some of those, Peter, and I'd like to get your views on what you think COVID's going to do to the building stock. What are we going to be building? What are people going to need out there? What do you think the main focuses are going to be for the construction sector and brownfield sites?
Now, that's a really challenging question, because pre-COVID, obviously there was a massive impetus to build cities, higher density living. Smart cities were the order of the day, trying to develop better and smarter and more intensely populated cities to reduce travel times and improve environmental means around it. COVID would appear as throwing a spanner in the works. There's no question about it that lots of individuals are trying to the move to the country, as it's being described in the press. And that's not necessarily a good thing from a point of view of the levelling up agenda, because as usual, the only people who are going to be able to do that are those with the means to do so, which could mean that inner cities become less diverse, less balanced. Our development as a constructor, as a construction industry, is going to be to actually renew and hopefully build better and brighter and smarter cities on brownfield. So COVID, I think, may actually be a bit of a game changer, but only time will tell. I'm rather hoping that we condemn it to the dustbin of history very, very quickly. And I won't say go back to normal, but at least go back to a pre-COVID intent of developing better, smarter, structured living for everybody.
Excellent. Well, it's interesting to hear those views, Peter, and we try and keep these nice and short and snappy to keep our viewers engaged, and we're I'm gonna come to the final throes of my questioning. Where's the most interesting or the most challenging job that you've ever been involved with, Peter? One from the history books, or maybe something more current. What's been the most challenging and the most interesting project for you?
I think probably within the realms of contaminated land, you have to do well to comment on anything other than the Olympic Park, which had such a wide variety of contaminated land issues, not just related around gases, but all types of contamination, and the fact that it was built very, very quickly, obviously to an absolutely closely defined end date. So in terms of the most interesting, I think probably that one, given that it was also at a time of worldwide recession, that made a double challenge. So if I had to pick one, it would probably be that one, Neil.
Excellent. Well, we had many an hour down there, didn't we, Peter? Back in the day, back in the late 2000s, we spent.
Didn't we just?
We did. No. Well, Peter, that's really appreciate your input. Can you give us a plug for yourself, Peter? And your where will we get hold of you if anybody out there wants to get in contact? Where will they find you, Peter?
PAGEO, Peter at PAGEO.co.uk. We're based in Corby, consultancy, material supply and contracting in the contaminated land sector for ground gas. So please do feel free to contact us if it's of any help.
Excellent.
Good to speak to you, Neil.
Yeah, well, I'll put up a little flyer for you at the end of the webcast for us, and thank you very much, Peter. Really appreciate that, and we look forward to seeing everybody for our next episode, and thanks for joining us. So thanks for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye now.